Hi, I'm Kim O'Rourke, and this is the next video in my little series on binding, how to make your binding. So if you haven't watched the previous videos, definitely go back and check those, because I have told you the difference between straight grain binding and bias binding and where to use them, how to cut your fabric strips to make your binding, so that's both for straight grain and for bias, how to join strips for binding when you need a longer strip than your fabric gives you. And in this video, we're going to talk about, and how I'm going to show you, is how to make your binding itself. So you're going to start with strips, and I'm going to show you how to do this by hand, because we do have bias binder makers which look like that one. That's a 25mm, which will get you about a 1/2 inch finish size of binding. That's a pretty standard size. This is a 50mm binder maker. Now, these binding makers, I will show you how to use these in another video, but they are marvellous. So definitely you can get these. When you buy them, they seem quite expensive, but you'll love them. They're somewhere around the, I don't know, £6, £8, £12, depending on the size that you get. Definitely worth it, definitely having them around in your sewing bag. But for this video, I'm not going to show you how to use these, because I think it's important you know how to make it to start with, in case you don't have these. So I'm going to put those to one side. I feel a little bit like Blue Peter at the moment. So let me switch camera and show you what I've got on my cutting mat. So if you've been watching the previous two videos, you'll know that this strip here is the one that I've been cutting on the bias, and I've joined a couple of strips together. Obviously, you join as many strips together as you need for the amount of binding that you need. This is just cut on the straighter grain. But we treat these exactly the same way now. And the only thing that I might do with my my bias strips here is I'd probably just cut this end off, because it just makes my life just a little bit easier. So let me just do that now, just to give me a nice straight edge to start with. And I'll do that at the other end. Let's pretend this is the perfect length for me. There we go. So process is exactly the same. I'm going to use this strip because it's a bit easier to fit under my camera. So I'm just going to pause the video for a moment. I'm going to set up my little ironing table, my ironing board, and show you what to do next. Here we are then. So I've got my very snazzy, very high-end ironing table here, which is a towel. Nothing wrong with the towel, but feel free to use your ironing board, because it is a bit easier using your ironing board. And we've got our strips here. So you want to have joined all your strips first, like we did with the bias strips here. You join straight grain strips in exactly the same way as we did these strips here. Both types of strips you join in exactly the same way. So do go back and check that video out. So you will have a long strip of joined sort of mini strips to as long as that you need your binding for, to go around the edge of your quilt or whatever it is that you are binding. So when you've got all of that, you're going to turn it right side down. So wrong side up. And then the first job that we're going to do is fold it in half. And you're going to need to do this a little bit at a time, especially when you've got a great long piece of binding. If you were watching my previous video, or the video where we were measuring the edge of the binding to calculate measuring the edge of our project to calculate how much binding that we need, you'll know that we needed 73 inches of binding strip. So you're not going to be able to do that all in one go. So just do a little bit of a section at a time. But we're going to fold that over with our wrong sides together, and we're going to get our iron. I've got a little Prim travel iron here, which I use a lot for any of my little patchwork projects. It doesn't annihilate the ends of my fingers like my main iron does. And it's just really nifty. It's nothing for patchwork. It's a little Prim travel iron. I use steam. I know there's a lot of controversy about dry irons versus steam irons. I like using steam because I get a crisper finish. That's just me. You choose what you choose. What makes you happy? This is a hobby. It's supposed to bring us pleasure and joy, so you do what brings you pleasure. I'm not going to get involved in the quill police. I like using a steam iron because I like a crisp finish. That's not very good, is it? So we have just folded this in half and pressed it in half. By the way, this little iron runs very hot, so it is actually really good for getting very crisp finishes. There we go. So when I've pressed that in half, like that, and by the way, the size of this particular strip is 2.5 inches. But if you check out my previous video, I'll put the link in below that on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, I'll put the link below. I tell you how to calculate this amount, but this particular strip happens to be 2.5 inches. So we've got our fold line in the middle there. And then what we are simply going to do is turn one side in, so that raw edge into the center. So we're on the wrong side facing up this time. And we're going to turn our edge in so that the raw edge nearly matches that center line that you've just pressed in. It doesn't go all the way, just nearly there, but not quite. And I'm going to press that along there. And as you can imagine, when you are doing a great old long strip of binding, it can take a little while to do this, which is why those bias binder makers can really come into their own. But it is really good to know how to do this from scratch. I think with all things, before we get into all the gadgetry, know how to do it from scratch first. And then you'll know whether the gadgetry is worth it or not. But I think those bias binder makers definitely are worth it. So I'm just doing the other side in exactly the same way. Just folding that raw edge in, so it's nearly at the center line, but not quite. By the way, I would not suggest you do this on a towel on your cutting mat, because my cutting mat doesn't like it very much. It is an old cutting mat that I've got on underneath here. If you've got one of the little class ironing pads that you get, use one of those as well. So I've got my raw edges folded in, nearly meeting the bit in the middle, but you can see I've got a bit of a gap there. That's because I need to fold it over, and I don't want a load of bulky bits with this sitting in that center seam. So I'm going to fold that over like that. So I'm just folding the folded edge to the folded edge. So folding it in half. Let's get that in camera. And then I'm just going to go along with the iron again. Oh, whoops. All the way along. And just for good measure, I'll do that the other side. Just make sure it's all lined up as well. I don't want any wonky bits. Okay, there we go. And that, when you've got your whole long strip all folded like that, that is ready to now be attached. And if I measure that, you will see that I'll get the measurement the right way around, is just over 1/2 inch, which is absolutely perfect, because when I fit it onto the edge of my project, that'll end up as 1/2 inch by the time I take all my little folds into account. So that is perfect. So that is how to make your binding. It's very satisfying. It's very easy. with those little Prim travel irons. You can just get them on Amazon. They're about 35 quid, somewhere around there. I think it's the same in US dollars. If you're watching in the States, it's about $35. I have no idea. Do you know why that happens? Why we have whatever the price is in dollars, it's the same in pounds, and vice versa. I don't know. I don't know why that works. Anyway, in the US, it's about $35. In the UK, it's about £35. And that's all you need to do. So they're definitely worth having for your sewing room. If not, use your main iron. When you've finished, if you're making it in advance, just roll it up to store it, and then you're good to go. As I said, your bias strips, if you're making those, you make them in exactly the same way. You fold it over, and then you fold each edge in. It's exactly the same both ways. So I hope that's helped. And in the next video, watch out for that one, because I'll show you how to attach it to your quilt. And there's 2 ways of doing that. So definitely watch out for that video. I'll see you then.